guys, it's Aoife from Words of Clover and I'm here to do my October wrap up. I had another great reading month in October. I did go on holidays at the very start of October and I did do a reading vlog for the books that I read during that holiday, so I won't be talking about them too much here, but I will leave that vlog linked up above if you haven't watched that yet. So the first book I finished at the end, kind of the end of September, start of October, was an audiobook, and that was As Good as Dead by Holly Jackson. This is the third book in A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, where we're following a teenage girl called Pip into a murder kind of mystery that happened in her town a few years ago, and throughout the first, second and third book we see her as she kind of always takes on a new project around a true crime mystery, and in this book things really ramp up. In the first two books, a lot of things happen to Pip from kind of fallout of her investigations and of, you know, looking into people, finding out secrets and things like that. You see a lot of that result, like the result of that in the third book, where she seems to have a lot of PTSD, some issues. It kind of comes, she's almost the central role in this new mystery, where it seems that she's the target of someone who is connected to a past serial killer. And it's really interesting seeing Pip again kind of figure things out, but she's the one that's in danger this time, so things are like really high intensity, really high stakes, and Holly Jackson really went there with this book. I was really surprised at the turn she took and how dark things got. Like Pip really like she went to places where I did not think that she was going to go, and I was just really impressed that Holly Jackson as an author had the balls to go there. So yeah, I did really enjoy this book. It is quite dark. I gave it a good 4 out of 5 stars. I do think my favourite one was probably my first book still, as that just really gets you into the world. It's a little bit lighter in places. It doesn't go kind of dark and twisty like the second and third book, but I still really love this trilogy as a whole. It was so good. It's really good on audiobook, so I recommend it on audio, and I'm just really excited to see what Holly Jackson brings out next, because I think she's definitely one to watch, and I can't wait for her to bring out either more YA books, or I would love to see her bring out an adult mystery book as well, because I think it would be really good. The next book I read after that was Big Bad Me. This was by Aislinn O'Loughlin. I talked about this briefly in a kind of like a recommendations video, where I was recommending books, kind of more Halloween-y autumnal books based on some kind of more darker supernatural shows, and I recommended this one for fans of, say, like Teen Wolf or Buffy, and I hadn't read it yet, and I was saying in that one that I had like really high hopes for this one. I just felt like I was really going to like it, and unfortunately I was really wrong about this book. So this one is about a girl, what is her name, Evie, and she, at the very start of the book, she ends up finding out that she is a werewolf. She's been a werewolf her entire life, and it's really her kind of like her adoptive mom and her adoptive sister have been keeping this from her for her entire life, and her sister is almost like this kind of cool monster slayer type of person, and her mom is a scientist who was originally helping Evie's biological mother and father with their like werewolf genes, and like trying to help them control their werewolf changes and things like that, and their anger and shifts and stuff like that. And now her mom has disappeared, and this guy ends up coming onto their doorstep and trying to attack Evie. So her and her sister end up going on the run and running to this small town where they think was the last place their mom was seen, and they're trying to figure out what happened to their mom, but also kind of trying to keep themselves safe, while at the same time Evie is coming to terms with the fact that she's a werewolf and trying to figure out all these new changes that are happening in her body, trying to control her like monstrous urges, and also finding out that things like vampires exist as well, because there are vampires in this town that are causing a bit of ruckus. So all of it sounds really fun, and I really loved what the author was trying to do with this, and it did feel very like there's very like kind of an almost like supernatural campiness to it as well that I enjoyed, but there was just a lot of like, I just felt like things happened so quickly. I had no time to like really get a grip to the story before things were happening like rapidly, and they just didn't stop. And I felt like how people reacted, kind of the relationships that were formed really quickly, like it all just happened so quickly, and it just felt very unbelievable. I did like kind of the world that was being created here. It felt very like Riverdale-esque, or even like, is it Mystic Falls from the like Vampire Diaries. It felt like this very type of town where there was loads of supernatural creatures happening in it, and I did really like that. I felt it was really fun setting, but again I just think that the author just needed to slow down with this book. I think if she'd slowed down, kind of really like put a lot more emphasis into like description and like just the plot building up, rather than the characters going 100 miles an hour all the time and trying to fit everything into this one book, yeah, I think it just would have been way better. So I think I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. And yeah, it was kind of a struggle to get through, and I actually wouldn't recommend it really unless you are into something, just wanting some campy type of fun, something not too serious at all. And then I would recommend it. But yeah, for me, it just was a bit of a fail, unfortunately. That I read The Stranger You Know by Jane Casey, the fourth book in the Maeve Kerrigan kind of crime series that I follow. This one was another really interesting one. This is we're following a person who seems to be killing women, and it seems to be connected to a case from a long time ago, and Maeve ends up finding out that her partner Josh is actually connected to this case, and he used to be a suspect in this case, and because of that he is now could be a suspect for these murders. So Maeve has to kind of try and start digging into these murders, the present murders and also the past murder, see if anything was missed, and is it a case that he may have actually been the murderer all along and he's murdering these women, in which case is she like literally working with a murderer every single day, or is it someone else out there trying to, you know, like dirty his name, trying to get him locked up for something that he didn't do. So she starts looking into this. This one again was really fun. I always love like a Maeve Kerrigan series. It's just a really fun series for me to follow. I always enjoy the crimes. I love Maeve as a character herself. I love her, like her experiences, like seeing her experiences as a woman in a very male dominated industry, in particularly like obviously like police work, but in her like I guess division, she's pretty much one of the only women, and it's always just interesting like seeing that, though there are always kind of uncomfortable moments, outdated language, things like that, as I've talked about before with this series. This one I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and yeah, it was good. It was good mystery. I'm going into the books that I read during my holiday, so I'm just going to talk about these and give them the rating. I'm not going to talk about them too much. So the first one I read was a supernatural the first book in a supernatural series, and that was The Marionettes by Katie Wismer. I really enjoyed this one. I gave it a really strong 4 out of 5 stars. It's to do with vampires and witches. After that, I read Vladimir by Julia May Jonas, which is a kind of college campus type of book where we are actually following a woman who is a professor. So she is in her like 60s, I think, in this, and she becomes enamored by a young colleague of hers who is in his like early 40s, like late 30s, early 40s, and she kind of becomes obsessed with him. I enjoyed this one as well. Another like probably 3.5 star for me. I liked kind of the campus setting, and I really liked having an older protagonist as well. I thought that made it really interesting, particularly because it was college set. I liked the fact that we were following older professors with a lot of life experience rather than young college students. So yeah, I enjoyed this one. For that, I read Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. This one I've given to my dad because I think he would really enjoy it. I gave this one another 4 out of 5 stars. It's a mix of historical fiction plus a present day storyline. We are following a character who is she is playing a woman who was a pilot in like the 50s, and she disappeared while trying to fly around the world, and we're kind of trying to figure out like we go back in the story, then we go back to this pilot's life and we follow her from a young age, and we kind of see what was happening in her life and what may have happened during that expedition where she disappeared, and what actually happened to her. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one as well. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I definitely enjoyed the historical fiction parts more than the present day storyline. I felt they were a lot more compelling, and the character herself was a lot more compelling. But yeah, if anyone has this on their shelf and is thinking about reading it, I would definitely recommend it. It was definitely a really kind of gripping story for me to read. The last book that I read while I was on holidays was All the Lovers in the Night by Mieko Kawakami. This is a book that I've actually compared to another book that I read in September, which was called Violets, and that was a translated Korean fiction book. We're following a solitary young girl in Korea, and I described it as being like one of the saddest books I've read in my life. This one is really similar, except obviously it's set in Japan. We are following a woman called Fuyuko, who is again a very solitary person. She doesn't really have a lot of friends. She works from home, and we see her, she's kind of shut herself off from everything in her life. She doesn't really go out to find friends, but again she seems really lonely, and we see her end up kind of forming a friendship with this man that she meets. And how they kind of start meeting like once a week, and it's not really dating, but it's not really friendship, it's kind of something in between. And we see her as she tries to like kind of come out of her shell a little bit, and this is a very kind of introspective novel. We're really following her as she kind of is thinking about everything going on in her life, all these kind of like fears and wants that are inside of her that she's just buried really deep. Near the beginning of the novel, she starts drinking, and we kind of see that throughout the novel. Her drinking gets really bad, and she's kind of drinking as a way of almost just to pass the time, because she has nothing else to do once she finishes work. She doesn't really have much else to do except drink, and there's times it's really hard to read this novel because of what she's doing to herself because of that drink and because of that, yeah, that isolation that she's put herself in. Yeah, there were times where this was just a very melancholy, sad book. But I will say it definitely has where Violet's has quite like a sad ending. This one has a lot more of a hopeful ending. I did really seeing where she ended up by the end of the novel. Yeah, but I did enjoy this one. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. I didn't enjoy it as much as Breasts and Eggs by Mieko Kawakami, but I will definitely still read more of her work, as I do think she's a really interesting writing style, and I do really enjoy it. So yeah. Then I read another audiobook, and that was Watermelon by Marian Keyes. So I've actually read one book by Marian Keyes, and that was The Breakup, which I read a couple of years ago during an Irish readathon. And I've always said I wanted to go back and start from the very beginning of her catalogue. The easiest way to do this is obviously through the library. And I decided to start with Watermelon. Decided to start it with audiobook, and the audiobook was okay. It wasn't great, to be honest, but I still did enjoy the story as a whole, while I kind of ignored the annoying audiobook narrator. In this one, we were following a woman called Claire Walsh, who on the morning that she gives birth to her daughter, her husband comes to her and tells her that he's actually been having an affair, and he's going to be leaving her for another woman, who is actually a woman who lives in their apartment building. And obviously Claire is absolutely devastated. This was completely out of the blue. She didn't see it coming, and she's literally just given birth to their daughter as well. So she's like very hormonal and emotional, and because of that as well. And she ends up like taking her daughter and leaving London and going back home to Ireland to her mum and dad, where she kind of moves back in with them and her 2 sisters, and she kind of has to figure out how to start rebuilding her life again and heal her broken heart. And that's basically what the story is. We're seeing her in her kind of like mad family and the family unit. We're kind of being introduced to this family for the first time, as she does have like a Walsh family series where we're following the different sisters in this family, and we're kind of being introduced to all of these sisters like for the first time in this book. There's a really like interesting point in this book where her husband comes back, and we see him literally like gaslight her and start thinking that everything was her fault. And I thought it really interesting to see how Marian Keyes, like this book was written, I think, and was published in 94, 95, how almost like that's like 25 years ago, how Marian Keyes was able to portray this like really like great example of gaslighting and manipulative behavior in this book. It's been a 3 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it. I didn't absolutely love it, but I still did really enjoy it, and I'll be going on and reading Rachel's Holiday soon. And a book I read after that is a book that is very, very highly talked about at the moment. It's kind of like a real buzzy book at the moment, and that is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. So this is a memoir by Jennette, who was a child actress. She was on Nickelodeon, iCarly on Nickelodeon, and I used to watch iCarly. Me and my brother really, really liked iCarly. So there's definitely parts in reading this book that like I feel like I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to watch an iCarly clips or episode ever again, and knowing what Jennette was going through in her personal life while like doing the series, and how much she actually hated doing the whole thing. And it does definitely kind of spoil like the show, like a childhood show for you a little bit. But this is Jennette's kind of like experience being a child actor, but it's mostly her talking about her relationship with her mother, who was very emotionally abusive, and kind of forced Jennette into being an actor, and pretty much made Jennette have a really, really bad eating disorder. And yeah, it was just really tough. Like this is a really tough book to read, just seeing what like how a mother could do that to her child, could not even see like what she was doing to her child. I will say, well, like obviously the topic of this was really important, and I do feel like this is a book that Jennette had to write. You could tell this is kind of like almost a cathartic, therapeutic experience for Jennette to get this book out there and get her story out there and let people know what she was going through for so many years. I don't know if this book like it tells you a story, but it doesn't really have a whole lot of, I don't know what you'd call it, healing or anything in it. Like I feel like there's definitely, I've seen other people say this, but there's a lack of reflection in this book, which is due to, I think, like Jennette writing it before she was maybe fully, I don't think if you could ever be fully healed from experience like this, but before she herself was probably able to fully reflect on those experiences. We're kind of just told everything that happens, but she never really reflects on anything. A very black and white book, and I feel like there was a lot of like, there should have been a lot more like grey in it or something. I don't know, like it's really hard. And it's one of those things where I'm like, oh, I didn't love this book. Am I a terrible person because I didn't absolutely love this book and I'm not rating it 5 out of 5 stars? Because obviously like this is Jennette's experience and how can you rate someone's experience, but I'm kind of was rating more the writing and like the how the story was portrayed and delivered to readers. And that's what I'm thinking of when I'm rating this book, not Jennette's story at all. So yeah, I just couldn't give it a 5 stars. It just wasn't a 5-star book for me. I did feel like there was a point in this book as well where she started talking about kind of her relationships, and all the relationships that she has in this book, like any sexual relationships she has, are with men who are much older than her. So I think like her first proper boyfriend in this, she is like 18 or 19. I think she's 18 and her boyfriend is like 32. And there, as I said, there was none of that reflection. I was like, if there was a reflection in this book, it would have been like, you know, why was she that young and going out with a guy who was so much older than her, in a sexual relationship with someone so much older than her? And you know, there was just so many things like that where I felt like really kind of creeped out a little bit. Like I would have loved a little bit more, like like I don't know, something more about that, like the fact that like this obviously wasn't a healthy thing to be in, like this wasn't a healthy relationship for an 18-year-old to be in. And then even later on when she gets into another relationship, she starts like, she talks, she had like she put things in around like her sex life and things like sex acts that she was doing with these boyfriends, that I felt like actually didn't add anything to the book. I just felt like they were there for shock factor in a way, and I don't think they added anything at all, and I don't really know why they were in there. So yeah, I just didn't really understand that either. Yeah, I give this a 4 out of 5 stars. I would definitely recommend it for people who wanted to read it, but yeah, it just wasn't a 5-star book for me, and I don't know if that makes me a terrible person or not. And after that, I read Wicked Souls by Katie Wismer, which is the second book in the Marionettes. Continues as our main character Valerie is looking into these mysterious deaths of all these vampires and witches that are happening, and we also see her having to deal with a lot of things that are happening with her own self as well. And some of these things are really scary, and she doesn't really know what to do, and it's getting out of control. And then we also see her relationship with her partner, the prince of the vampires, whose name is Reginald, but he goes by Reed, which is a much better name than Reginald. No offense to any Reginalds out there. So her and Reed, their relationship kind of progresses, and there's just so much chemistry and like things going on, like steaminess going on between these two characters that was just so good. I really loved the build up to their relationship. And then there was a very sexy moment that happens in this, in a communal bathroom, which I never thought would be like a sexy place for things to happen in a book, but the way it all happens in the book is very good. And yeah, that was a really good, there was only one really steamy scene in this book, but it was a really good one. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. And yeah, again, ended on a really good note. The third book is coming out, I think, on the 15th of November, and I'm really excited to read it. I really can't wait to read it. So yeah, I am excited for that. So I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars as well. And then I read another new favourite of mine, and that was a book I read on audiobook, and it was Her Majesty's Royal Coven by Juno Dawson. I read this on audiobook, as I said. It was narrated by Nicola Coughlan, and she did a really good job. I really enjoyed her Irish narration of this book, following a group of women who are in their 30s, and when they were in the early to mid 20s, they had to deal with this like really big war, and they had to fight this big bad evil. And obviously, like, there was a lot of like really terrible things that happened. They saw a lot of trauma, they experienced a lot of trauma, they lost people they loved, and they none of them came out of that like big war like undamaged. They all have like things that like really affect them because of that. Teenage character comes into this book, and about midway through this book, this teenage character comes out as trans, and we see how this really splits this group of friends up, as we see some friends come out in support of them, and then one of them in particular comes out, and she kind of reveals herself to be a huge transphobe, and she is like a massive TERF. And we see fears that are happening that are already there at the start of the book because of this new prophecy that there's going to be this new big evil rise up, and there may be a connection to this new evil with this teenage character. And we see like our TERF character, we see how this affects all of her reasoning and all of her decision making in like as the book goes on, and we see her make some really terrible decisions out of like fear and bigotry and all of that. Even though I really enjoyed this book, I thought it was just so good. I kind of described it at one point as, I feel like this is the book for people who are fans of Harry Potter who just can't deal with that world anymore because of J.K. Rowling and because of her transphobic attitudes. And I feel like this is a book that's there for like adult people who as a child read Harry Potter can't do it anymore, is kind of looking for this new magical world but more of an adult one. And we're seeing this in like Her Majesty Royal Coven. This is like our magical world. We are with characters who are pretty much almost the same age as a lot of people who would have like read Harry Potter when it first came out. And we are seeing these characters who've already gone through like a big battle, have like are dealing with all of that, and now are having to fight again. And like I just feel like this was I just feel like this is made for a particular group of people who were mourning something and needed some new magical world. And this is it. But at the same time, Juno Dawson isn't treating her readers with kid gloves. Like we're dealing with real issues and real modern day issues in this book as well, because there is that huge, like a huge element of this book is like some characters' transphobic attitudes, and we're seeing that like that's a huge thing at the moment, obviously in the UK and in Ireland as well. People coming out with these transphobic behaviors and attitudes. Just really liked how like it all came about, and I also like the fact that one of the character who does come out like as a pretty bad person in the end, like, you know, she like the other characters, like they're all her friends and they all love her so much, and they've all had like these like big experiences with her, have had her as their friend for years, and at one point they literally have to turn around and be like, I can't be friends with you anymore if this is how you're going to behave, and if you cannot see how horrible you are being and how damaging you are being, like I can't be friends with you. And I really liked this whole conversation, and I feel like there's no one that has come out of the last few years, whether it's to do with COVID and all the conspiracy theories around COVID and the vaccine and stuff like that, and then also things around like, you know, Donald Trump's era as president as well, and all the stuff that he was saying, whether it was racist or misogynistic or transphobic or anti-LGBT in some way, and then obviously all the things stuff at the same time around trans people and trans people's right to exist, because trans rights are human rights. And, you know, I feel like no one has escaped seeing someone that they either work with, are friends with, or someone in their family, someone that they care about in some way, and seeing a really ugly side of that person they've never seen before, and realizing that something breaking a little bit inside of you when you see a person's attitude and realize that you're seeing something that this person has been hiding for a long time, and you like there's nothing you can do or say that can actually change that person's mind as much as you try. And yeah, there's something really sad and really heartbreaking about that, and I don't think there's many people who have escaped feeling like that because of seeing someone's true nature or true feelings in some way. And yeah, I just feel like that was done really well in this book, and that was kind of a tangent, but I think it was done really well in this book. This book ends on such a cliffhanger. I literally almost wanted to scream. It was so good, and I cannot wait for the next book. This is probably my new favourite series. I absolutely loved it. 5 out of 5 stars. Cannot wait for the next book. I need it like now. I needed it yesterday. I need the next book right away. It was so good. The next book I read after that was The Southern Bookclub's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. This was a great one to read in the run up to Halloween. This is set in the 90s. We're following this group of housewives as they set up this book club, and then this new man moves into their area, and at first like they like him, he seems really nice, and then slowly we're following Patricia is our main character, and we're following her as she kind of starts noticing all these weird things about this guy and weird things in the area, and then she kind of comes to the conclusion that there's something weird about him, and like they need to stay away from him. And we see how this man ends up like turning all of these wives' husbands against them, and starts thinking that like, oh, they're just like these like crazy women, like, and you can't like trust crazy women, and you know, we're a boys club and we should like stick together and all of this. And this is just mad. Like, this actually takes place over a good few number of years, and I kind of enjoyed that as well, and seeing how this guy ingratiates himself into this community and like almost like brainwashes all the husbands into believing that he's like a nice guy. And also at the same time, like we're obviously following Patricia's side of things, so we're like, oh, like, is she correct in what she's thinking, or is he just like a normal guy, like, or is she just like absolutely going insane and seeing things and imagining things that aren't there? But yeah, this was really good. I enjoyed it a lot, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Definitely recommend it. The only thing I will say is this is set in the 90s, and I kept forgetting it was set in the 90s. I kept thinking it was set in like the 50s or 60s because of like the housewife and like working husband attitude. It just felt, even for the 90s, it felt like really old school. Like, it felt like really backward in a way. Yeah, 4 to 5 stars. After that, I read The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty, and this, don't know why I read this. I think I got this on like a Kindle deal last year, and I kind of saved it for this year because I was like, oh, that'll be a great one to read during Halloween. And yeah, like it was fine. Like it was, we're obviously like this one, if people haven't like know about the movie or anything, we're following a mother and a daughter, and the daughter starts acting really weird, and eventually like it kind of feels like a demon has like taken over her, is like possessing her, and she hires loads of doctors to try and help the child, and eventually she hires not hires, but she talks to these priests, like a local priest, into trying to convince him to do an exorcist on her daughter because she feels like, or an exorcism on her daughter because she feels like she is possessed or something is happening to her, and she kind of like her last hope is to turn to the church, and she's not even a religious person. And we just kind of see how that plays through the entire book, and we see like the change in the child from like the start where she's just this really nice happy-go-lucky kid to the end of the book where she is literally, you know, like stabbing herself in places you do not want to be stabbed in, and like cursing at her mother and like horrible language coming out of her, vomit spewing everywhere. Yeah, it's pretty grim. The writing in this was fine. It was quite like intellectual actually. Like I kind of felt like a lot of the conversations with all of the characters like throughout the book were quite like, they were fairly like intellectual conversations that I was kind of like, okay, I'm not really sure if I'm getting everything like I'm supposed to be getting with these conversations, but like cool. I wouldn't say it was very scary. It was more disturbing in the fact that like the things that are happening to like a 9-year-old child or something. I'm not sure what age she was, but she was like, I think she was like 8 or 9, and it was just really hard like imagining like this child, like this thing happening to this child, and what the demon was like making this child do and like making this child say. That was like the most disturbing thing about the entire book, obviously. I wouldn't say I enjoyed it. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Like if you really want to read it, I was kind of like, I'm kind of glad now that I kind of like a horror classic that I've read it, but I wouldn't be like running to read it again, and I wouldn't be like running to recommend it to people. So yeah, I mean, read it if you want to read it. I don't think I gained a huge amount from reading it, but now I know what The Exorcist is about. I don't think I'll be watching the movie either. I think the movie might be a bit too much for me as well. The last book I want to talk about, I did technically finish this in November, but it was more of an October read, so I want to talk about it in my October wrap up, and that was Pet Sematary by Stephen King. So this is actually my first Stephen King book, and I'm actually really glad I picked this one up as my first book because I ended up really enjoying it. So in this book we are following a character called Louis Creed, who he and his family, he gets a new job as a doctor in a university, and him and his family move into this new house in this small town in Maine. And when they move into the house, they meet the neighbours across the road from them, and they're kind of worried about, first of all, the road right outside their house is a really busy road. There's loads of cars like whizzing up and down on that road, and particularly loads and loads of trucks. So it's quite like a dangerous road for say like kids and pets. And then also the neighbour as well kind of becomes friendly with them, and at one point he tells them that there's like a pet cemetery like near the woods in the back of their house as well, where like local kids for years have been burying their pets, and it's kind of just like a local legend kind of thing, and it's a little bit creepy, but like they're like, okay, cool, whatever. And things kind of progress from there, and we just see things kind of take a turn and get a little bit creepy and a bit unsettling, and Stephen King is Stephen King, so things kind of go a little bit batshit crazy at one point. And yeah, there's like kind of there's a horror element, but it's mostly just kind of like a creep element in the entire book. And obviously there is conversation in this book around like animals dying and people dying, and yeah, so if you don't like that, obviously don't read this book, but I'm an animal lover and I kind of felt okay about reading all of that. I do think the very end of it, like there was like this big build up to the end, and then the end with a character that like I felt like there was going to be like, I felt like there was going to be a bit more of a showdown with a character, and it didn't really happen. So I felt like we kind of got this big build up, and then like in a couple of pages, like literally in a paragraph really, things wrapped up, and I was just like, okay, cool. So yeah, but as I said, I did really enjoy this one, and I'll definitely be picking up another Stephen King book. If anyone has any particular recommendations for the next Stephen King book I should try and pick up, please let me know, because I would love to know what I should go to next, considering I did really enjoy this one and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. So that is everything I read in October. Another big wrap up as always. Thank you guys so much for watching as always. Leave me any comments down below. I would love to chat, and I will see you guys again next time. Bye.